A racist boss fired a black employee, telling her she would never belong anywhere. Years later, when he least expected it, she returned as his new CEO. What happened in that reunion changed both their lives forever, in a way no one could have imagined. A story of resilience, transformation, and the power of never giving up. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart and make you believe that the future can always be rewritten. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button on this video, and comment where you're watching from. Maya Chen had just finished arranging the conference room table when she heard the door slam behind her. The harsh tone in her manager's voice didn't surprise her anymore, but the reason he gave certainly did. Termination for not fitting the company profile. It was the third time that week she'd been interrupted during what anyone could see was impeccable work, but this one cut deeper than the rest. Richard Holbrook, a man who avoided eye contact with her and always spoke in sharp, dismissive tones, made no effort to hide his contempt as he delivered the news. Years later, she would still remember his words with a mixture of pain and unexpected strength. "You'll never belong here," he had said. The words hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that would burn for a long time. Maya stood there for a moment, her hands still holding the stack of presentation folders she'd been organizing. The conference room smelled of fresh coffee and printed documents, the kind of corporate atmosphere she'd worked so hard to be part of. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Seattle stretched out before her, all glass and steel and possibility. But none of that possibility seemed meant for her anymore. She watched Richard's retreating figure disappear down the hallway, his expensive suit a stark reminder of everything she wasn't in this place. Her reflection caught in the window glass. A young black woman in a carefully chosen blazer, hairstyled professionally, everything about her appearance calculated to fit in. Apparently, it hadn't been enough. The elevator ride down felt endless. Maya pressed herself against the back wall, hoping no one would get on and ask questions she couldn't answer yet. Her mind raced through the morning's events, searching for signs she might have missed. She'd been early as always, had prepared the client presentations with the attention to detail that had earned her recognition in her previous job. She'd even stayed late the night before to research additional market data that wasn't required, but would make their pitch stronger. None of it mattered now. The security guard at the front desk avoided her eyes as she handed over her badge and keycard. She wondered what story they'd been told about her sudden departure. Outside, the Pacific Northwest drizzle matched her mood perfectly. Maya pulled her coat tighter and started the long walk to the bus stop, her personal belongings from her desk packed in a small cardboard box. Inside were a framed photo of her daughter Zoe, a succulent plant that had somehow thrived under fluorescent lighting, and a coffee mug with Maya's marketing magic printed on it in cheerful letters. A gift from Zoe for her 32nd birthday, back when magic still felt possible. Now the words seemed like a cruel joke. She thought about how she'd explain this to her 7-year-old daughter, who'd been so proud to tell her classmates that her mom worked in a tall building downtown. The bus was crowded with afternoon commuters, people heading home to families and dinner plans and weekend preparations. Maya found a seat near the back and stared out the rain-streaked window. Her reflection stared back again, and she noticed things she hadn't seen that morning. The way her shoulders had curved inward during those final minutes in the office. The tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there when she'd kissed Zoe goodbye and promised to help with her science project that evening. She was already changing, already becoming someone smaller. The realization made her sit up straighter. A tiny act of defiance that no one else would notice but felt significant nonetheless. With limited resources and her confidence badly shaken, Maya spent the following months trying to understand what she'd done wrong. The unemployment benefits helped with basic expenses, but they wouldn't last forever. She analyzed every interaction with Richard, every project she'd completed, every meeting she'd attended. She'd been detail-oriented to a fault, always punctual, often the first to arrive and last to leave. Her ideas had been creative and well-researched. She knew this because her former colleagues had often asked to see her work, sometimes incorporating her suggestions into their own presentations without acknowledgement. She'd noticed, but hadn't spoken up, telling herself that success would speak for itself eventually. The job search felt like walking through quicksand. Every interview seemed to go well until it didn't. She'd arrive perfectly prepared, answer questions with confidence and specificity, only to receive polite rejection emails a few days later. Companies were seeking candidates who would be a better cultural fit, they said. Others wanted someone with a different background. The language was always careful, always professional, but Maya began to recognize the patterns underneath. She was either overqualified or underexperienced, too ambitious or not ambitious enough. never quite right for reasons that were never quite explained. During one particularly difficult August evening, Maya sat at her kitchen table with bills spread before her like tarot cards predicting a grim future. Zoe was asleep in their small apartment's single bedroom, and Maya had been using the living room couch as her bed for months now. The math was simple and unforgiving. Her savings were almost gone, unemployment was running out, and her last interview had been another polite rejection. She thought about calling her sister in Portland, but pride stopped her. Carmen had warned her about moving to Seattle with such big dreams and limited connections. Maya hadn't wanted to hear it then, and she couldn't bear to prove her sister right now. That's when she noticed Zoe's science project materials still scattered on the counter. They'd been working on a volcano that week, mixing baking soda and vinegar to create eruptions of fizzy foam. Zoe had been fascinated by the chemical reaction, asking endless questions about why certain combinations created something entirely new. Maya picked up the empty baking soda box and found herself thinking about transformation, about how basic ingredients could become something powerful under the right conditions. Maybe she needed to stop trying to fit into spaces that weren't designed for her and start creating her own reaction instead. The idea came to her slowly, like dawn breaking over the Puget Sound. Maya had always been good with people, good at reading what they needed even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. At her old job, colleagues had often asked for her input on presentations, not just because she was thorough, but because she understood how to connect with audiences. She could see what message would resonate, what story would stick. Maybe there was a way to turn that skill into something she could own entirely. The next morning, she started researching business licenses and tax requirements for personal consultation services. Maya's apartment became her headquarters and laboratory. She used Zoe's art supplies to create mood boards and color schemes, turning their coffee table into a makeshift desk for client consultations. Her first customers were neighbors and other parents from Zoe's school who'd noticed her impeccable style and asked for advice. Mrs. Rodriguez from 3B wanted help updating her work wardrobe for a promotion interview. Jessica, a single mom who worked double shifts at the hospital, needed outfits that could transition from day to night shifts without requiring a complete change. These women didn't need a corporate consultant charging hundreds of dollars an hour. They needed someone who understood their real lives and real budgets. Word spread through the kind of networks that existed below the radar of traditional business circles. Maya's clients were teachers and nurses, administrative assistants and small business owners. Women who worked hard but had never thought they deserved to invest in themselves. Maya didn't just help them choose clothes or makeup techniques. She listened to their stories, understood their challenges, and helped them see themselves as worthy of attention and care. Each transformation felt like healing something in herself too. When a client stood taller after their session, when they smiled differently at their reflection, Maya remembered what confidence felt like. The autumn brought unexpected opportunities. Maya had been operating her consultation business from her apartment for 6 months when she received a call from the Seattle Women's Business Association. Someone had nominated her for their Emerging Entrepreneur Award, though she never learned who. The nomination required submitting a business plan and financial projections, documents Maya had never formally created, but found herself capable of producing. Late nights at the kitchen table became planning sessions where she mapped out her vision for expanding beyond individual consultations into workshops and group sessions. The awards ceremony was held at a downtown hotel, the same kind of venue where Maya used to organize corporate events in her previous life. She wore a dress she'd bought secondhand but tailored herself, deep blue with clean lines that made her feel both professional and authentic. Zoe came with her, wearing a yellow dress and the kind of pride that only children can display without self-consciousness. When they announced Maya's name as the winner of the Emerging Entrepreneur category, Zoe jumped up and cheered so loudly that the entire ballroom smiled. Maya's acceptance speech was brief, but she mentioned the importance of creating opportunities rather than waiting for them to appear. The award brought media attention and new clients, but more importantly, it brought investors. 3 different groups reached out within a month, each interested in funding her expansion plans. Maya was careful in her negotiations, insisting on maintaining creative control and company culture. She'd seen too many small businesses lose their soul in pursuit of growth. By winter, she'd signed with a local investment group that specialized in women-owned businesses and understood her vision for sustainable, ethical expansion. With funding secured, Maya opened her first official office space in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, a bright studio with large windows and room for both individual consultations and group workshops. She hired 2 part-time assistants, both young women who brought fresh perspectives and social media expertise that Maya was still developing. The business grew from personal styling into what Maya called lifestyle empowerment, helping clients align their external presentation with their internal goals and values. Corporate consulting requests started coming in as local businesses recognized the connection between employee confidence and productivity. One particularly significant project came through an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Williams, whom Maya had helped prepare for a medical conference presentation, recommended her to the Human Resources Department at Cascade Technologies, a medium-sized tech company struggling with employee retention and workplace culture issues. The initial consultation revealed deeper problems than anyone had anticipated. Exit interviews showed patterns of discrimination and exclusion that were costing the company both talent and reputation. Maya was asked to develop a comprehensive program addressing not just dress codes and professional presentation, but inclusive leadership and cultural transformation. The Cascade Technologies project lasted 8 months and became a case study that elevated Maya's reputation throughout the Seattle business community. She developed workshops on unconscious bias, inclusive communication, and leadership presence that were both practical and transformational. Employees who had felt invisible or undervalued began speaking up in meetings. Retention rates improved dramatically, particularly among women and employees of color. The company's CEO publicly credited Maya's work with saving both money and morale, a testimonial that opened doors to larger corporate contracts. Success felt different than Maya had expected. There was satisfaction in the financial stability, in being able to move to a larger apartment where Zoe could have her own room again. There was pride in seeing her work featured in business publications and conference presentations. But the deepest satisfaction came from the stories her clients shared. The nurse who finally applied for a management position she'd been avoiding for years. The teacher who found the confidence to speak up about classroom resources her students needed. The small business owner who stopped apologizing for taking up space in networking events. Maya kept a folder of thank you notes and before and after photos that reminded her why she'd started this journey. By her 3rd year in business, Maya had built something she'd never imagined possible. Her company, Authentic Leadership Consulting, employed 12 people and served clients throughout the Pacific Northwest. She'd been featured on local news programs and invited to speak at national conferences. Zoe, now 10, helped with filing and occasionally offered brutally honest opinions about client transformations that made everyone laugh. Maya had bought a small house with a garden where she could grow herbs for cooking and flowers for pure joy. Life felt full in ways that had nothing to do with revenge or proving anyone wrong. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, while Maya was reviewing proposals for a new corporate training program. Her assistant knocked on her office door with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. There was a representative from Sterling Global Enterprises on the line, asking if she would be interested in discussing a senior position with their human resources division. Sterling was one of the largest consulting firms in the region, known for working with Fortune 500 companies on organizational development and strategic planning. Maya almost declined the call immediately. She was happy with her business, proud of what she'd built, and skeptical of corporate environments that talked about innovation while maintaining rigid hierarchies. But something in the recruiter's voice caught her attention. This wasn't a standard corporate recruiting pitch. Sterling Global had recently completed a merger with a European firm and was restructuring their entire approach to talent development and organizational culture. They were specifically seeking someone with Maya's background in inclusive leadership and proven track record with cultural transformation. The position would be Director of People Development, reporting directly to the executive team with authority over training, retention, and workplace culture initiatives across all divisions. It was an opportunity to impact thousands of employees rather than hundreds, to influence policy at the highest levels of a major corporation. Maya agreed to a preliminary conversation, more out of curiosity than genuine interest. The video interview was conducted by Sterling's Chief Human Resources Officer, a woman named Sandra Mitchell who had apparently followed Maya's work for some time. Sandra spoke about the challenges facing modern corporations, the need for leaders who understood both business performance and human development. She acknowledged that Sterling had work to do in areas of inclusion and employee engagement. The conversation felt genuine in a way that surprised Maya. When Sandra asked what it would take to bring Maya to Sterling, she was honest about her reservations about corporate culture and her commitment to maintaining the values that had guided her business. The negotiation process took 6 weeks. Maya insisted on guarantees that her programs would have executive support and adequate funding. She wanted assurance that diversity and inclusion initiatives wouldn't be the first items cut during budget reductions. Most importantly, she wanted to bring 2 of her key staff members with her to ensure continuity in her approach and methods. Sterling agreed to all her conditions, offering a compensation package that was significantly higher than what Maya had projected for her business's next 5 years. The financial security was appealing, but what convinced her to accept was the scope of impact she could have, and the promise of resources she'd never had access to as an independent consultant. Maya's transition to Sterling Global began in September with a comprehensive assessment of current culture and practices. She spent her first month conducting focus groups with employees at all levels, reviewing exit interview data, and analyzing retention patterns across different divisions. The picture that emerged was troubling, but not surprising. Despite having diversity statements and inclusion policies on paper, the actual experience of many employees told a different story. Women and people of color reported feeling excluded from informal networks that influenced career advancement. Several divisions had developed reputations as boys' clubs, where certain types of personalities and backgrounds were more likely to succeed regardless of actual performance. The data was clear, but changing entrenched patterns would require more than new policies or training programs. Maya developed a comprehensive strategy that addressed systemic issues through multiple approaches simultaneously. Leadership accountability became a key component, with inclusion metrics incorporated into performance evaluations for all managers. Mentorship programs were restructured to ensure broader representation and cross-cultural connections. Hiring practices were audited and revised to reduce unconscious bias in recruitment and selection processes. Maya knew that sustainable change required buy-in from the top, so she spent significant time working with senior executives to help them understand both the business case and moral imperative for inclusive leadership. The work was challenging, but energizing. Maya found herself thinking strategically about organizational systems in ways that her consulting business had never required. She was building something bigger than individual transformations, creating frameworks that could outlast any single leader or economic cycle. Her team grew to include specialists in training design, data analysis, and program evaluation. They developed assessment tools that could measure cultural change over time and identify specific areas where additional interventions were needed. Maya felt like she was using all of her skills and discovering new ones she didn't know she possessed. Sterling's culture began shifting in ways that were both subtle and measurable. Employee engagement scores improved across all demographic groups, but particularly among women and employees of color who had previously reported feeling marginalized. Retention rates stabilized and then began climbing. Internal promotion rates became more equitable as bias-aware hiring and advancement practices took hold. Maya's programs were featured in business publications as examples of effective organizational change, and other companies began requesting consultation on similar initiatives. But the most significant change came 18 months into Maya's tenure at Sterling Global, during what should have been a routine executive committee meeting about quarterly performance reviews. Sandra Mitchell was presenting updates on human resources metrics when she mentioned that the board had approved a major acquisition that would bring Sterling's European operations under unified leadership. The merger had been in discussion for months, but the specific details were just becoming clear. Maya was taking notes about how the integration might affect her diversity and inclusion programs when Sandra mentioned the name of the incoming executive who would oversee the consolidation process. Richard Holbrook would be joining Sterling Global as Chief Executive Officer of the newly merged entity, bringing extensive experience in international business development and operational efficiency. Maya's pen stopped moving across the page. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat, creating a sensation like swallowing ice water too quickly. The conference room continued buzzing with conversations about integration timelines and reporting structures, but Maya heard none of it. She was transported back to that conference room in Seattle, to the sound of a door slamming and words that had once made her feel smaller than she'd ever felt before or since. Sandra was still talking about leadership transitions and organizational restructuring when Maya realized that everyone was looking at her expectantly. Apparently, someone had asked her a question about how the merger might impact ongoing culture change initiatives. Maya cleared her throat and managed to give a coherent response about the importance of maintaining momentum during times of organizational uncertainty. But inside, her mind was racing through implications and possibilities she hadn't anticipated when she'd accepted this position. The man who had once told her she would never belong anywhere was about to become her boss again. After the meeting, Maya sat in her office with the door closed, staring out at the downtown Portland skyline without really seeing it. She thought about calling Sandra to ask for more details about Richard's background and leadership style, but she wasn't sure how to frame those questions without revealing her personal history. She thought about updating her resume and reaching out to her network about other opportunities, but that felt like running away from something rather than moving towards something better. Most of all, she thought about Zoe, now 13 and thriving in middle school, who had grown up hearing stories about perseverance and creating your own opportunities. What kind of message would it send if her mother fled at the first sign of a challenge from the past? Maya decided to wait and see what kind of leader Richard had become in the years since their last encounter. People could change, could learn from their mistakes, and grow into better versions of themselves. She had certainly changed dramatically since that painful day in Seattle. Maybe he had too. But even as she tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, Maya knew she needed to be prepared for the possibility that he hadn't changed at all. She began documenting all of her programs and achievements at Sterling, creating a comprehensive record of her contributions that could speak for itself regardless of personal history or bias. The announcement of Richard's appointment came 3 weeks later through a company-wide email that emphasized his track record of successful mergers and operational improvements. His photo showed a man who looked older and perhaps more polished than Maya remembered, but the confident expression and sharp suit were exactly the same. The email mentioned that he would be conducting individual meetings with all senior staff to discuss strategic priorities and organizational goals. Maya's meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in November, exactly 5 years and 2 months after their last encounter. Maya prepared for the meeting with the same attention to detail that had served her well throughout her career. She created a comprehensive presentation about her department's achievements, including metrics that showed measurable improvements in employee satisfaction, retention, and advancement equity. She prepared responses to likely questions about budget allocation, program effectiveness, and integration challenges. She chose her outfit carefully, a navy blue suit that projected authority and competence without being flashy or attention-seeking. She practiced her introduction until it felt natural, professional, and confident. But as Maya walked toward Richard's temporary office that Thursday afternoon, none of her preparation could calm the flutter of anticipation in her chest. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who had been devastated by his dismissal. She had built a successful business, earned recognition as an expert in her field, and proven her value to one of the region's most respected corporations. She had nothing to prove to Richard Holbrook or anyone else. Yet something about seeing him again felt like completing a circle she hadn't known was open, confronting a chapter of her story that had shaped everything that came afterward. Maya knocked on the door at exactly the appointed time and waited for his invitation to enter. Richard was sitting behind a large desk, reviewing documents that were spread across its surface in neat piles. When he looked up and gestured for her to take a seat, his expression was pleasantly professional but showed no signs of recognition. He introduced himself as though they were meeting for the first time, which in many ways they were. The young woman he had dismissed no longer existed, and Maya wasn't sure what kind of man he had become either. She shook his hand, introduced herself as Director of People Development, and prepared to discover what this new chapter would bring. The meeting lasted 45 minutes and covered all the topics Maya had anticipated. Richard asked thoughtful questions about her programs, seemed genuinely interested in the data she presented, and took notes throughout their conversation. He praised the measurable improvements in employee engagement and retention, acknowledging that these metrics were particularly important during periods of organizational transition. His demeanor was professional and respectful, focused entirely on business matters without any personal commentary or inappropriate behavior. Maya began to relax slightly, thinking that perhaps this would be a straightforward working relationship after all. As the meeting concluded, Richard mentioned that he was impressed with the comprehensive nature of her programs and looked forward to supporting their continued development. He asked if she had any concerns about the merger or suggestions for maintaining employee morale during the integration process. Maya provided several thoughtful recommendations about communication strategies and support systems that had proven effective in previous organizational changes. Richard thanked her for her insights and said he would incorporate her suggestions into the broader transition planning. They shook hands again, and Maya left his office feeling cautiously optimistic about their future collaboration. Walking back to her own office, Maya felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that the encounter had been professional and productive, free from the tension and conflict she had feared. But also disappointment that there had been no acknowledgement of their shared history, no opportunity to address the pain of their previous interaction. She realized she had been hoping for something, though she wasn't sure what. An apology, perhaps? or at least some recognition of how much she had grown and accomplished since their last meeting. Instead, she was left with the unsettling feeling that a significant chapter of her life had been completely erased from his memory. Over the following weeks, Maya watched Richard's leadership style emerge as he settled into his new role. He was efficient and decisive, moving quickly to implement structural changes and streamline operations. He held regular meetings with department heads, reviewed budget allocations carefully, and demonstrated a strong focus on measurable outcomes. His communication with staff was clear and direct, and he seemed genuinely committed to understanding Sterling's culture and preserving what was working well while improving areas that needed attention. Maya found herself grudgingly admitting that he appeared to be a competent executive, regardless of their personal history. But as the holiday season approached, Maya began noticing subtle changes in the workplace atmosphere that concerned her. Richard's focus on efficiency and cost control was leading to decisions that undermined some of the culture change initiatives she had worked so hard to establish. The budget for her diversity and inclusion programs was reduced by 20%, with little discussion or consideration of the potential impact. Several employee resource groups were asked to justify their existence and demonstrate measurable business value in ways that felt reductive and dismissive of their actual purpose. Maya tried to schedule a meeting with Richard to discuss these concerns, but his assistant repeatedly postponed their appointments due to more urgent priorities. The situation came to a head in January, when Maya discovered that Richard had unilaterally canceled the company's participation in several external diversity conferences and partnerships, saving money but eliminating important networking and development opportunities for underrepresented employees. When she finally managed to get a brief meeting with him to discuss this decision, Richard dismissed her concerns as philosophical rather than practical. He suggested that her programs had achieved their initial goals and could now be scaled back to focus on maintenance rather than continued expansion. The conversation felt frustratingly familiar, an echo of power dynamics Maya thought she had left behind forever. Maya spent the following weeks documenting every decision Richard made that impacted her programs, building a careful record of how his cost-cutting measures were systematically undermining years of progress. She wrote detailed memos explaining the connection between employee engagement initiatives and business outcomes, supported by data from Sterling's own performance metrics. She requested meetings to discuss long-term strategy for culture development, only to have them canceled or postponed indefinitely. Each interaction left her feeling more frustrated and less hopeful about finding common ground with her new boss. The breakthrough came in an unexpected way. Maya was working late one evening in February, preparing a presentation for the board about employee retention trends, when she received an urgent call from night security. There had been an incident in the parking garage involving 2 employees, and they needed someone from Human Resources to respond immediately. Maya grabbed her coat and headed downstairs, where she found a young black intern named Marcus sitting in a security office, visibly shaken and fighting back tears. His car had been vandalized with racial slurs, and he was afraid to report it officially for fear of being labeled a troublemaker. Maya sat with Marcus for over an hour, listening to his story and helping him process both the immediate trauma and his deeper concerns about workplace safety. This wasn't the first incident he'd experienced since starting his internship, he admitted. There had been jokes and comments that made him uncomfortable, assignments that seemed designed to exclude him from important projects, and a general sense that he wasn't welcome in certain spaces within the company. Maya felt her heart breaking for this young man who reminded her so much of herself at that age, trying so hard to belong somewhere that didn't seem to want him. The next morning, Maya submitted a formal incident report and requested an immediate investigation into the vandalism. She also asked for a broader review of intern experiences to determine if Marcus's concerns reflected larger patterns of discrimination. Richard's response was swift and disappointing. He suggested that the vandalism was likely the work of outside perpetrators rather than Sterling employees, and that conducting a broader investigation would create unnecessary drama and potentially damage the company's reputation. He recommended that Maya provide Marcus with some counseling resources and move on from the incident as quickly as possible. Maya knew she couldn't let this go. She scheduled meetings with all of Sterling's current interns, creating a safe space for them to share their experiences without fear of retaliation. What she discovered was even worse than she had feared. The intern program, which was supposed to be a pipeline for developing diverse talent, had become a place where promising young people were systematically excluded and demoralized. Several interns reported experiences similar to Marcus's, while others described feeling invisible or unwelcome in ways that made them question their own perceptions and abilities. Armed with this information, Maya requested another meeting with Richard to discuss immediate reforms to the intern program. This time, she brought detailed documentation of the problems she had uncovered, along with specific recommendations for addressing them. Richard's response was cold and dismissive. He suggested that Maya was being overly sensitive and looking for problems that didn't really exist. Young people needed to develop thicker skin if they wanted to succeed in corporate environments, he said. Creating special accommodations and protections would only make them weaker and less prepared for the real world. The conversation escalated quickly. Maya found herself arguing passionately for the importance of creating inclusive environments where all employees could thrive, while Richard insisted that his primary responsibility was to Sterling's bottom line, not to social engineering projects that distracted from business objectives. The more animated Maya became, the more detached and condescending Richard's responses grew. Finally, he ended the meeting by suggesting that Maya might be too emotionally invested in these issues to maintain the objectivity required for her position. Perhaps she should consider whether Sterling Global was the right fit for her long-term career goals. Maya walked out of that meeting feeling a familiar rage that she hadn't experienced in years. The rational part of her mind knew that Richard's behavior was unprofessional and potentially discriminatory, that she had legal options and administrative channels for addressing his conduct. But the deeper part of her, the part that remembered being made to feel small and unwelcome, wanted nothing more than to prove him wrong in the most dramatic way possible. She spent the rest of that day drafting a resignation letter that outlined every problem with his leadership and every failure of Sterling's commitment to inclusive culture. She wrote with the satisfaction of someone finally telling the truth, regardless of consequences. But Maya didn't submit the letter. Instead, she called her former business partner, Carmen, who had maintained connections throughout the Seattle business community. Carmen listened to Maya's frustrations and anger, then asked a simple question that changed everything. What would quitting accomplish for Marcus and the other interns who were counting on her to advocate for them? Walking away might feel satisfying in the moment, but it would leave vulnerable employees without protection and give Richard exactly what he seemed to want. Carmen reminded Maya that she had spent years building expertise and credibility specifically to fight these battles. This was the moment when all that preparation would matter most. Maya deleted the resignation letter and started working on a different strategy. She began documenting every interaction with Richard, every policy change that affected diversity and inclusion programs, every incident that demonstrated patterns of discrimination or bias. She reached out to employees throughout Sterling who had benefited from her programs, asking them to share their experiences and the impact those initiatives had made on their careers. She connected with board members who had supported hiring her, updating them on her department's achievements and the challenges she was facing under new leadership. Most importantly, Maya started building alliances with other senior leaders who shared her concerns about Richard's approach. The chief financial officer had noticed that employee turnover was beginning to increase again after years of steady improvement. The head of marketing was concerned about the impact of reduced diversity initiatives on Sterling's brand reputation, particularly with younger consumers who increasingly made purchasing decisions based on corporate values. The general counsel had been fielding more complaints about workplace discrimination and was worried about potential legal exposure. Spring brought a series of events that would test everything Maya had learned about strategic thinking and emotional resilience. Sterling's parent company announced that they would be conducting a comprehensive review of all divisions to identify best practices and areas for improvement. As part of this assessment, every senior leader would be evaluated not just on financial performance, but on employee engagement, retention rates, and cultural alignment with corporate values. Richard would be judged on his success in maintaining Sterling's positive workplace culture while achieving integration goals. Maya realized that this review represented an opportunity to present objective data about the impact of Richard's leadership decisions. She spent weeks preparing a comprehensive analysis that tracked key metrics from before and after his arrival. The numbers told a clear story. Employee satisfaction scores had declined across multiple measures. Retention rates for women and employees of color had worsened significantly. Several major clients had expressed concerns about Sterling's commitment to diversity and inclusion after learning about reduced programming and support. The cost of replacing talented employees was beginning to outweigh the savings from cutting culture programs. When Maya was invited to present her findings to the review committee, she felt the weight of every conversation she'd had with hurt and discouraged employees. This wasn't about her personal history with Richard anymore. It was about creating the kind of workplace where people like Marcus could thrive. where talented individuals weren't excluded because of how they looked or where they came from. Maya's presentation was thorough, professional, and devastating. She offered specific recommendations for addressing the cultural decline and restoring Sterling's reputation as an inclusive employer. The committee's questions were probing but respectful. They asked about the methodology behind her data collection, the validity of her conclusions, and the feasibility of her recommendations. Maya answered with confidence, backed by years of experience and careful research. When one committee member asked directly whether she believed Richard's leadership style was compatible with Sterling's stated values, Maya paused for a long moment before responding with measured honesty. She said that leadership effectiveness should be judged by results, and the results showed clear areas where improvement was needed. 2 weeks later, Maya received a call from Sandra Mitchell requesting an urgent meeting. When Maya arrived at Sandra's office, she found the entire executive team assembled around the conference table. Sandra explained that the review committee had completed their assessment and identified significant concerns about cultural regression under Richard's leadership. The board had decided that immediate intervention was necessary to protect both employee welfare and business outcomes. Richard would be placed on administrative leave pending a more detailed investigation, and Maya would be asked to assume interim leadership of the affected divisions while serving as the primary liaison to the review process. Maya felt the floor shift beneath her as Sandra continued explaining the scope of her new responsibilities. She would have authority over all human resources functions, direct access to the executive team for policy decisions, and budget control for restoring and expanding diversity and inclusion programs. The position was temporary for now, but depending on the outcome of the investigation and her performance in the role, it could become permanent. Sandra asked if Maya was prepared to take on this challenge, and Maya heard herself accepting before her conscious mind had fully processed what was being offered. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who had once told her she would never belong anywhere was now being removed from power partly based on her professional assessment of his leadership failures. But Maya felt no sense of triumph or revenge. Instead, she felt the overwhelming responsibility of proving that inclusive leadership could deliver both human and business results. She spent her first week in the interim role meeting with every employee who had been affected by the recent cultural changes, listening to their experiences and explaining the steps being taken to address their concerns. Marcus was one of the first people Maya called to her office. She wanted him to know that his experience mattered, that speaking up about discrimination hadn't been in vain, and that Sterling was committed to creating a better environment for all employees. Marcus listened with tears in his eyes as Maya outlined new protections for interns, enhanced reporting procedures for discrimination, and mentorship programs designed to support underrepresented employees. When she asked what else he needed to feel safe and valued at Sterling, Marcus was quiet for a long time before saying that he just wanted to be judged on his work rather than his appearance. Maya threw herself into the work of cultural restoration, with an intensity that reminded her of the early days of building her consulting business. She reinstated programs that had been canceled, increased funding for employee resource groups, and implemented new accountability measures for managers at all levels. She created safe spaces for employees to share their experiences and concerns without fear of retaliation. Most importantly, she worked to rebuild trust between leadership and staff, acknowledging past failures while demonstrating genuine commitment to change. The response was immediate and measurable. Employee engagement scores began climbing within the first month. Retention rates stabilized and then improved, particularly among the women and employees of color who had been most affected by the previous cultural regression. Client relationships strengthened as Sterling's reputation for inclusive leadership was restored. Maya found herself working 16-hour days, but the work felt meaningful in ways that reminded her why she had entered this field in the first place. Summer brought news that the investigation into Richard's leadership had been completed. The findings supported Maya's assessment that his decisions had created a hostile work environment for many employees and violated Sterling's stated values around inclusion and respect. While the investigators found no evidence of intentional discrimination, they concluded that Richard's leadership style was incompatible with modern workplace standards and corporate social responsibility expectations. He would not be returning to Sterling Global in any capacity. Maya was offered the permanent position of Chief People Officer, a newly created role that would give her authority over all aspects of human resources, culture development, and diversity initiatives across Sterling's global operations. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, expanded staff, and direct reporting relationship to the CEO. More importantly, It came with the resources and authority to implement the kind of comprehensive cultural change that could serve as a model for other organizations. Accepting the promotion felt like stepping into a future Maya had never quite dared to imagine. She thought about the young woman who had been dismissed from that conference room years ago, who had spent months questioning her own worth and capabilities. That woman couldn't have conceived of holding this much power and responsibility, of being trusted to shape the experiences of thousands of employees across multiple countries. The journey from that painful moment to this triumphant one felt both impossibly long and surprisingly natural. Maya's first major initiative as Chief People Officer was launching a global leadership development program focused on inclusive management practices. She partnered with universities and consulting firms to create curriculum that addressed both conscious and unconscious bias, while providing practical tools for building diverse teams. The program became mandatory for all managers and was expanded to include aspiring leaders at all levels. Within a year, Sterling's leadership demographics began shifting as employees who had previously been overlooked were identified and promoted based on merit rather than similarity to existing leadership. The success of Maya's programs attracted attention from business publications and academic researchers studying organizational change. She was invited to speak at conferences and consult with other companies facing similar challenges. Harvard Business School developed a case study based on Sterling's cultural transformation under her leadership. Maya found herself being recognized as a thought leader in the field she had entered almost by accident, someone whose expertise was sought by Fortune 500 companies and government agencies alike. But the most meaningful recognition came from employees whose lives had been changed by her work. Maya kept a file of thank you notes and success stories that reminded her why this work mattered. The intern who had been promoted to a full-time position after excelling in a project leadership role. The experienced engineer who had found the confidence to apply for management positions after participating in leadership development programs. The marketing manager who had stopped hiding her accent and cultural background after attending workshops on authentic professional presence. One particularly powerful story came from a young woman named Sarah, who had joined Sterling as an entry-level analyst while Maya was still building her consulting business. Sarah had struggled with anxiety and self-doubt that made her question whether she belonged in corporate environments. Through mentorship programs and inclusive leadership training, she had developed both skills and confidence that led to rapid career advancement. Now, 5 years later, Sarah was leading her own team and crediting Maya's programs with transforming not just her career, but her entire relationship with professional ambition. As Maya's third year as Chief People Officer came to an end, Sterling's board announced another major transition. The current CEO was retiring after a distinguished career, and the board was conducting a global search for his replacement. Maya wasn't initially considered a candidate, given her relatively recent entry into senior executive roles. But as the search process unfolded, board members began asking whether they needed to look outside the company for the leadership qualities they were seeking. Maya's name began appearing in discussions about internal candidates who embodied Sterling's values and had demonstrated exceptional results in their current roles. Her track record of cultural transformation, combined with her understanding of business strategy and operations, made her an increasingly attractive option. When the board formally approached her about considering the CEO position, Maya was initially reluctant. She loved her current role and was concerned about moving away from the hands-on culture work that gave her the greatest satisfaction. But Maya also recognized the unprecedented opportunity to lead organizational change from the highest levels of corporate power. As CEO, she could ensure that inclusive leadership principles were embedded in every aspect of Sterling's operations, from hiring and promotion practices to client relationships and community partnerships. She could create a model of corporate leadership that proved business success and social responsibility were not competing priorities, but complementary strengths. The interview process was rigorous and comprehensive, involving multiple meetings with board members, stakeholders, and employee representatives. Maya was asked to present her vision for Sterling's future, including strategies for growth, innovation, and competitive positioning. She emphasized the connection between employee engagement and business performance, drawing on data from her years of culture work to demonstrate how inclusive practices drove productivity, creativity, and customer satisfaction. When the board announced Maya's appointment as Sterling Global's new CEO, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Employees who had worked with her were excited about the prospect of leadership that understood their daily experiences and challenges. Clients expressed confidence in Sterling's continued commitment to ethical business practices and social responsibility. Industry observers noted the significance of appointing a black woman to lead a major consulting firm, recognizing both the symbolic importance and the practical implications for advancing diversity in corporate leadership. Maya's transition to the CEO role was carefully planned to ensure continuity in both culture programs and business operations. She promoted several of her key staff members to expanded roles, ensuring that the human resources and diversity initiatives she had built would continue to thrive under new leadership. She spent months meeting with clients, partners, and stakeholders to understand their expectations and concerns about Sterling's future direction. Most importantly, she continued the employee listening sessions that had become a hallmark of her leadership style, ensuring that organizational change happened with, rather than to the people it affected most. One of Maya's first decisions as CEO was to establish Sterling Global as a certified B Corporation, formally committing the company to balancing profit with purpose. This designation required meeting rigorous standards for social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. It also meant that Sterling's success would be measured not just by financial returns, but by positive impact on employees, communities, and society as a whole. The certification process took months and required changes to corporate governance structures, but it sent a clear message about the kind of company Sterling was becoming under Maya's leadership. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some longtime clients were initially skeptical about Sterling's new direction, concerned that an emphasis on social responsibility might compromise the hard-nosed business advice they expected. Maya worked patiently to demonstrate that ethical leadership and strategic effectiveness were mutually reinforcing rather than competing priorities. She used data and case studies to show how companies with inclusive cultures and strong values consistently outperformed their peers in innovation, employee retention, and long-term profitability. Maya also faced pressure from some board members and investors who worried that her focus on culture and values was distracting from traditional business metrics. She responded by implementing comprehensive measurement systems that tracked both financial performance and social impact, showing how improvements in employee engagement and community relationships translated directly into business results. Within 2 years, Sterling's revenue growth, client satisfaction scores, and employee retention rates were all at record levels, providing concrete evidence that Maya's leadership approach was delivering results that mattered to all stakeholders. The most difficult moment of Maya's tenure as CEO came during her 4th year in the role, when Sterling was invited to bid on a massive consulting contract with a government agency. The project would have generated significant revenue and elevated Sterling's profile in the public sector. However, Maya's research into the agency revealed patterns of discrimination and civil rights violations that conflicted with Sterling's values and B Corporation commitments. After extensive deliberation with her leadership team and board, Maya made the decision to decline the opportunity, choosing ethical consistency over short-term financial gain. The decision was controversial, both within Sterling and in the broader business community. Some critics argued that Maya was imposing her personal political views on business decisions, while others questioned whether any company could afford to be so selective about revenue opportunities in a competitive market. Maya addressed these concerns directly in a company-wide meeting, explaining that Sterling's commitment to social responsibility wasn't a luxury they could afford only when convenient, but a core principle that guided all their decision-making processes. The long-term vindication of Maya's decision came when the government agency was later subject to a federal investigation that revealed systemic corruption and discrimination. Companies that had worked with the agency faced legal challenges and reputational damage that far exceeded any potential revenue from the contracts. Sterling's decision to decline the work was retrospectively seen as evidence of strong ethical leadership and risk management, enhancing rather than damaging their reputation in the marketplace. As Maya's 5th year as CEO approached, she began reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this position. The painful memory of that conference room dismissal felt like something that had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. She thought about Richard occasionally, wondering what had become of him after leaving Sterling. She had heard through professional networks that he had struggled to find another executive position, that his reputation in the industry had been damaged by the circumstances of his departure. Maya felt no satisfaction in his difficulties, only a kind of sadness for opportunities lost and lessons learned too late. The transformation in Maya's own life was profound and measurable. Zoe was now 18 and heading to college, confident and articulate in ways that reminded Maya of her own younger self, but without the self-doubt and fear that had held her back for so many years. They lived in a house with a garden where Maya grew vegetables and flowers, hosting dinner parties for friends and colleagues who had become like family. Maya had financial security she had never imagined possible, but more importantly, she had work that felt meaningful and sustainable. Sterling Global had become the kind of company Maya had dreamed of working for when she was starting her career. Employee satisfaction scores consistently ranked in the top percentile of their industry. Retention rates for women and employees of color exceeded national averages by significant margins. The company's client base had grown to include organizations specifically seeking Sterling's expertise in ethical leadership and inclusive culture development. Revenue and profitability had increased every year under Maya's leadership, proving that doing good and doing well were not mutually exclusive goals. The ripple effects of Maya's work extended far beyond Sterling's walls. Other companies began adopting similar approaches to leadership development and culture change, creating a movement toward more inclusive business practices throughout their industry. Maya was frequently invited to speak at conferences and universities about the business case for diversity and inclusion, sharing lessons learned from Sterling's transformation. Several of her former employees had been recruited to leadership roles at other organizations, spreading the principles and practices they had learned throughout their professional networks. Maya's story became a case study taught in business schools and leadership programs around the country. Students learned about the importance of resilience, strategic thinking, and ethical decision-making through examining her journey from dismissed employee to successful CEO. Maya occasionally guest lectured in these programs, sharing not just the successes, but also the failures and setbacks that had shaped her leadership philosophy. She emphasized that meaningful change required patience, persistence, and the courage to do what was right, even when it was difficult or unpopular. The most unexpected recognition came when Maya was invited to speak at a national conference on corporate social responsibility. As she prepared her presentation, Maya realized that the conference was being held in Seattle, just a few miles from the office building where her career transformation had begun. She decided to drive past the old location before her speaking engagement, curious to see how the space had changed in the intervening years. The building looked smaller than she remembered, older and somehow less imposing. Maya sat in her rental car for a few minutes, thinking about the young woman who had walked out of that building with her belongings in a cardboard box, and her confidence shattered. That woman had been so focused on fitting in, on proving she belonged in spaces that weren't designed for her. Maya had learned that belonging wasn't something you earned by changing yourself to match other people's expectations. Belonging was something you created by being authentically yourself and building environments where others could do the same. At the conference, Maya delivered a keynote presentation about leadership in times of change that received a standing ovation from the audience of business leaders and academics. During the question and answer session, a young black woman in the audience asked about advice for early career professionals facing discrimination and exclusion. Maya paused for a moment, thinking about all the young people like Marcus and Sarah, whose careers had been shaped by the opportunities and support they received during vulnerable moments. Maya's response was honest about the challenges while emphasizing the possibilities for creating change from any position within an organization. She talked about the importance of documenting experiences, building alliances, and developing expertise that would be valuable regardless of current circumstances. Most importantly, she emphasized that experiencing unfairness didn't define your potential or limit your future possibilities. Every setback could become preparation for future opportunities if you remained focused on growth rather than getting stuck in resentment. After the conference, Maya drove to the waterfront and walked along the pier where she used to bring Zoe to feed the seagulls during their most difficult financial periods. The sound of the water and the sight of the Olympic Mountains in the distance brought back memories of conversations with her daughter about dreams and possibilities, about not giving up when things seemed impossible. Zoe had believed in her mother's potential even when Maya had struggled to believe in herself. That faith had been one of the most important factors in Maya's eventual success. The evening flight back to Portland gave Maya time to think about everything that had changed in her life and everything that had remained constant. Her core values hadn't shifted. She still believed in fairness, hard work, and treating people with dignity and respect. But her understanding of how to live those values in a complex world had evolved dramatically. She had learned that being right wasn't enough if you couldn't communicate effectively with people who disagreed with you. She had discovered that changing systems required working within them while maintaining your integrity and vision. Most importantly, Maya had learned that success wasn't just about individual achievement, but about creating opportunities for others to succeed as well. The most satisfying moments of her career hadn't been personal promotions or recognition, but times when she had helped other people discover their own potential and overcome barriers that might have stopped them. Leadership, she had realized, was ultimately about expanding what was possible for everyone around you. As Maya's plane descended toward Portland, she could see the lights of the city spread out below like a constellation of possibilities. Somewhere in those lights were employees whose careers had been shaped by programs she had created. Young people who were pursuing dreams because someone had believed in their potential. Families whose lives had been improved by more inclusive workplaces. The impact of her work would continue long after she retired, carried forward by people she had influenced and institutions she had helped transform. Maya thought about the board meeting scheduled for the following week, where she would present Sterling's 5-year strategic plan for continued growth and social impact. The plan included ambitious goals for expanding their work internationally, partnering with educational institutions to develop the next generation of inclusive leaders, and creating new models of corporate accountability that other companies could adopt. It was work that excited her because it represented the next chapter of a journey that had begun with personal pain, but had evolved into something much larger than herself. The plane touched down smoothly, and Maya gathered her belongings for the short drive home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, decisions to make, and problems to solve. But tonight, she felt grateful for the winding path that had brought her to this moment, and confident about whatever the future might hold. She had learned that belonging wasn't something you waited for others to give you. It was something you created by being brave enough to be yourself, and generous enough to help others do the same. When Maya walked through her front door, she found a handwritten note from Zoe on the kitchen counter. Her daughter was away at college now, but she still sent letters and cards that reminded Maya of the most important things in life. This note simply said, "Mom, I'm proud of who you've become and excited about who you're still becoming. Love always, Zoe." Maya smiled and put the note on her refrigerator next to photos of Sterling employees at various company events. Reminders of all the lives that had been touched by choosing hope over bitterness, growth over stagnation, and love over fear. The kitchen smelled of the herbs she grew in her garden, and through the window she could see the lights of other houses where families were ending their days and beginning to dream about tomorrow. Maya made herself a cup of tea and sat at the table where she had once spread out bills like tarot cards predicting a grim future. Now that same table held strategic plans and budget projections for initiatives that would impact thousands of people across multiple countries. The transformation felt both miraculous and completely natural, the result of countless small decisions to keep growing rather than staying stuck in past hurts. Maya opened her laptop and began reviewing notes for the presentation she would give to a group of young entrepreneurs the following month. These emerging business leaders were asking questions about how to build companies that succeeded financially while making positive social impact. Maya wanted to share not just the strategies and best practices she had developed, but also the deeper truth that sustainable success required aligning your work with your values, even when that choice seemed risky or difficult. As she worked, Maya felt the satisfaction that came from using all of her skills and experiences in service of something meaningful. The pain of that long-ago dismissal had become preparation for understanding how exclusion felt and why inclusion mattered. The struggle of building her own business had taught her about resilience and resourcefulness. The challenges of leading organizational change had shown her how to balance idealism with pragmatism. Every experience, even the difficult ones, had contributed to her ability to create positive change in the world. The clock on the wall showed nearly midnight, but Maya wasn't tired. She was energized by the possibilities she could see ahead, the problems she might help solve, the people whose lives might be improved by the work she was doing. Tomorrow she would wake up and continue the work of building a more inclusive and equitable world, one conversation and one decision at a time. It was work that would never be finished, but that gave it meaning rather than futility. Every step forward created new possibilities for the steps that would follow. Maya closed her laptop and turned off the lights. But before heading upstairs, she paused to look out at the garden where she had planted flowers and vegetables that would bloom and grow in their own time. Some seeds took longer to germinate than others, but with patience and care, almost anything could flourish under the right conditions. The same was true of people and organizations and movements for social change. What seemed impossible today might become inevitable tomorrow, if enough people were willing to plant seeds and tend them with love and persistence. As Maya climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she thought about all the young women who were facing their own conference room moments somewhere in the world tonight, wondering if they would ever belong anywhere or accomplish anything meaningful. She wished she could tell each of them that their current circumstances weren't their final destination. that setbacks could become setups for comebacks, if they refused to let temporary defeats become permanent identities. The future was full of possibilities they couldn't see yet, opportunities that would emerge from their willingness to keep growing and learning and believing in themselves. Maya fell asleep thinking about the presentation she would give the next day, the employees she would mentor in the coming months, and the initiatives she would launch to create more opportunities for people who had been excluded or overlooked. Her dreams were full of gardens growing in impossible places, bridges being built across divides that had seemed permanent, and lights being turned on in rooms that had been dark for too long. She dreamed of a world where everyone could belong authentically, where potential was recognized regardless of packaging, and where success was measured not just by what you achieved, but by what you made possible for others. The next morning brought sunshine streaming through Maya's bedroom windows, illuminating a house filled with evidence of a life well lived and work that mattered. Photos of family and friends covered the walls, books about leadership and social change filled the shelves, and awards recognizing her contributions to business and community sat quietly on a desk where she planned initiatives that would outlast any individual recognition. Maya Chen had become exactly who she was meant to be, not despite the challenges she had faced, but because of how she had chosen to respond to them. The young woman who had been told she would never belong anywhere had created belonging for thousands of others. The employee who had been dismissed for not fitting the company profile had redefined what leadership could look like. The person who had been made to feel small had grown large enough to lift others up. Maya's story was proof that our worst moments don't have to define our futures, that exclusion can become the foundation for inclusion, and that the power to transform the world often begins with the courage to transform ourselves.